Hi. So today we are working on making my family's favorite baked mac and cheese. This is also something I've tweaked over many years. And so this is where we're starting. You need some flour, a stick of butter, any milk that you want. We prefer unsweetened almond milk, and some heavy whipping cream. If you want to use a non-dairy heavy whipping cream, that's fine. You need something that's going to give it a little thickness and creaminess. Now for the cheeses, this is a double batch, so you're going to be using a lot of cheese. I like to use shredded Parmesan. I've also used the powdered Parmesan. I do use it at the end too, so you'll see that in the video. Some American cheese, some mild cheddar, sharp cheddar, Monterey Jack, regular Velveeta, and a little Havarti. You can use whatever cheeses you want, but the basis usually should be mild and sharp cheddar and American or Velveeta or both. I find that works the best. Havarti has a nice little like creaminess, mild flavor to it, and it helps with the texture. So these are the cheeses I use. So now we're going to melt some butter in a pan while we get our water boiling for our noodles. Now, again, this is a double batch, so I'm using a full stick of butter. And once it's all melted, then I'm going to put in 6 tablespoons of flour. Everything here I'm giving you is double. You can easily halve this recipe. So there's a 6 tablespoons of flour, and I mix it around until it's nice and incorporated, and you want to make sure all of that flour is melty. You want it nice and thick and smooth, and I let it sit for a little bit and really thicken up nice so that it pulls away from the bottom and the sides of the pan. You'll see it's still kind of sticking to the pan, but then it'll start getting a little bit thicker as the time goes on. And this is also when I will add my onion powder. And I do a little bit, I do some, you don't want to do too much because that onion powder will really like overpower all of a sudden. And then I do a little bit of paprika. If you don't like paprika, sometimes it leaves a little like aftertaste. So I put very little, very little, but it gives it a little something. And then I also put just a tiny bit of garlic. Again, if you put too much, that's all you're going to taste because this is a very mild, but very creamy and cheesy mac and cheese. So any flavors you put in is going to be a little bit, you're going to notice. So just be careful with that. And then a little pepper. I don't do salt right away because the butter I use is salted and I don't like super salty mac and cheese. I do put a little salt in at the end when everything's all mixed together after I taste it. But you see how that's pulling away from the pan nice, and you can tell it's a nice creamy roux. Then to that I'm adding a total of 5 cups of liquid. So it's actually 4 cups of whatever milk and then a cup of whatever heavy cream you're using. I've used evaporated milk mixed with water. I've used non-fat dry milk and reconstituted it. I've used all kinds of milks. I've used regular milk, um, basically anything. But the heavy cream helps thicken it up at the end. So a cup of heavy cream, but you can also use a cup of half and half. It doesn't quite give it the same creaminess, but it will work. So no worries about that. So the next step is I take a bowl and I like to put all of my cheeses in. Now, you put in as much cheese as you want, but I do about a cup and a half to 2 cups of sharp cheddar. And here I'm doing the mild cheddar, and I forgot to write down how much this was, so I'm going to have to look at the screen. I think this is closer to the 2 cups of mild cheddar. I put more mild cheddar in than anything. Oh, yep, 2 cups. Oh, look at that. I was smart. I said 2. And then we go to the okay, the Monterey Jack. Now, if you don't like Monterey Jack cheese, don't use Jack cheese. Use Colby Jack. Use something else, but it's kind of a mild, but a shredded mild. So it's got to be a little bit harder of a cheese than, say, like the Velveeta or something. So I think that's about a cup, maybe? Yep, 1 cup. And mix that together. And then the Parmesan is about 3/4 a cup of the shredded here. If I use the powdered, it's more like a half a cup. I use a little bit less just because that acts almost like a flour when you put it into the mix. So we don't want it to thicken the sauce up too much. And then I put in about 5 slices of American cheese. This is just Kraft deluxe slices. They are not individually wrapped or anything like that. We get it from, the cheese section of the store, and I just tear them up, throw them in. You don't want big honking pieces because, it takes longer to melt. And then the Havarti, I also do 5 slices. Now, if you don't want Havarti, pick something else. I don't use like mozzarella or provolone because that's too stringy, but it's a mild cheese. So if you have another mild cheese that you like that will give a little creaminess, to the whole mix, then that's the best one to get. There's so many cheeses out there that I've never tried or that, I've heard of, but I don't know enough about, so I can't speak on that. But Havarti is my choice because it doesn't add a ton of flavor, but it does help with the texture, and the little bit of flavoring. And then last is 2 ounces of Velveeta. I don't care what kind of Velveeta you use. Some are flavored, some are not. I just 2 ounce chunk, and that's it. I don't need much more than that. I personally do not like Velveeta. If you give me Velveeta shells and cheese, I won't eat it. But the Velveeta helps smooth things out, and it gives it more cheddar because it's basically a cheddar American. And then I just break it up into pieces. All right, so now we've got our roux. We've got the milk in. You can see it doesn't get super thick, but you will notice that it's leaving a coating on the edge of the pan. And that's how you know, okay, it's going to work. It's got enough thickness to it that it's going to work. And I use a spoon, and it coats my spoon. And that lets me know, okay, it's perfect to put my cheese in. And you'll notice my noodles or my water's starting to boil for the noodles. So then I just put for all that cheese, I do it in like 3 or 4 batches. Like I'll put a bunch in and then I stir it around, make sure everything's mostly melted. The Velveeta takes the longest. You'll still have chunks of that. And I just do it, like I said, in batches and stir it around till it seems like it's mostly melted, all incorporated. The roux starts to change color because all the orange cheese. And then I just keep going with the cheeses until we need a little bit more. After it's all melted is when I taste it the first time, and I find that if I take a piece of just plain old bread and I smear some on it, I use a spatula and I smear a little bit of the cheese sauce on it, I can tell if I need more stuff. If I just take a spoonful of cheese sauce in my mouth, it's not quite the same because it does get mixed in with noodles. So while bread is not exactly the same because bread tends to have a little bit of sweetness to it, you can still tell better with the bread than you can if you just use a spoonful of sauce in your mouth. So just keep adding cheese, stir it around, cleaning the sides of the pan. You don't want to lose any of that ooey gooey goodness. Look how thick it's getting. Oh, I love this part. This is when I want to just dive in and start eating it like that. You can see Scooby down in the corner there, keeping an eye on Mom, see if I dropped any cheese on the floor, because that's, all my dogs are cheese hounds, but he is my Velcro dog. He is constantly under my feet. He's a Dachshund, supposedly Dachshund Chihuahua mix, but he just looks all Dachshund to me. Okay, there's the last of the cheese going in, and Scooby running away because he thinks I'm coming towards him. And we just mix and mix and mix and melt and mix and melt and melt and melt. It's a kind of slow process if you look at it this way. It took a little longer than this, obviously, because I'm making cuts, but it just looks so good. So 2 boxes of elbow noodles in all that water. And like I said, because this is a double batch. For each casserole dish, it's 11 by 9 casserole dish. I basically use a pound of elbows. There's my bread test. And it's so good. So, so good. And I will warn you that I went through and I ate that entire piece of bread with cheese sauce on it. I think I cut that out of the video, but I literally at one point I had half a piece of bread left. I just smeared cheese sauce all over it. It was so good. It was so, so good. So my noodles are boiling. And we're going to just get our pans ready. That's 11 by 9 casserole dishes. Spray a little Pam in there. You can line it with butter, whatever you want to do. But I just put a little Pam in there. And then I dump the cheese sauce into the noodles, scrape all that goodness. It drives me crazy when I watch other people do cooking videos and they do not scrape their pan and get all that good stuff out. So I scrape my pan. So there you go. And then just stir it all together. Incorporate everything together until it looks fabulous. And then you dump in, fill the casserole about halfway. This took 4 big ladles to fill each casserole dish. And then once you get the half in, you'll see it's going about halfway up the pan. Then what I do is I take the sharp cheddar cheese and I sprinkle some over. So it's like another layer of cheese. I don't do a ton. You'll see it's not massive amounts. It's a small handful. And it's just to cover it and give you a little bit of extra sharp in there, because I like a macaroni and cheese. It's got a little sharpness to it, but I don't like a ton of sharpness. So this gives me that little bit of extra without it being actually in the cheese sauce. And then it's another 3 or 4 scoops for the top. It's okay if it touches the top of the pan. A lot of times I'll put a casserole dish, or I mean a cookie sheet under my casserole dishes, but this doesn't tend to bubble over because it's not that wet. It's wet enough, but it's not so wet that it's going to bubble over. Now I'm going to switch to the second one and do the same exact thing. Now, then I melt a stick of butter, another stick of butter, yes, and then I use plain panko, and I mix it in with a whisk at first, and then I'm gonna it looks really wet and soupy, but you don't want to go overboard right here because you want to get it all mixed in so that the butter is soaked up into the panko really good. So it looks kind of like almost like oatmeal, I guess, is the texture you're looking for. And then I dump some Parmesan in because you want a little more flavor in the topping. So it's all measure with your heart kind of thing. Like, you know, if you only want a little bit of Parmesan, a lot of Parmesan, you can even put some of your onion powder in here. Another thing I've mixed in is the French fried onions that you use on top of like green bean casserole and stuff. I've crushed those up and put them in there. Oh, that's so good. A little more panko. You want it to be crumbly, kind of like a streusel, but not quite as dry as most streusels are. You want it to be a little on the wet side. And I have a wooden fork that I like to mix with, and I can pull from the bottom without hopefully making too much of a mess. I always dump some. It's not a big deal. So you take half of it and spread it on top of each casserole. So I scoop out about half, and then I will take my little fork there and I'll spread it around. It doesn't have to cover all the edges or anything. You just want it to touch the entire top so that no matter what scoop you take out, you have some, you know, breadcrumbs. And then on top of that, I take some dry panko and I sprinkle it over the top in just to cover the areas that didn't have any on it. So around the edges, in the corners, a couple spots in the center. It's not a whole bunch. It's just enough to kind of finish it off. And what happens is when you're cooking it, the cheese bubbles up in and it wets that panko. But that panko gets a little bit toastier than the buttered panko. And that's the end. Listen to that sizzle.